Welcome back to the Raising Men podcast. This is episode 5, and I am here with Meagan Popovic. I am, again, grateful for another amazing guest. Meagan is the sister of Mark Popovic. Meagan has worked with the Toronto Maple Leafs in her past. She's been a teacher at Western University, and our children actually train together at an incredible hockey academy, Ferroni Hockey Academy, which is in Hamilton, Ontario. So I'm, again, grateful to have you here. Lucky to be able to present this information. And yeah, Meagan, if you don't mind, sort of share, I've given a really brief intro and I hope it's been okay. But if you don't mind sharing your kind of professional experience or sort of where it all comes from.
Mind. So I'll ground, the first thing I think is the role that I play or I work in professional sport. And even preparing for this session today, I was like, what do I wear? A typical question of like, I'll do business on the top or relax, but I have the flip-flops on the bottom to remind myself that this is like that duality of the professional self and also the mom and the parent and the learner mindset that I still experience every day. Mm-hmm. And so professionally, my background and my master's, my PhD academically is in sport culture and how people and young people find meaning in their lives through sport, mm-hmm. and then how youth subcultures are formed in sport organizations. Fast track to my professional life outside of the academic realm of like teaching leadership and social change. And in that realm, I worked with the Toronto Maple Leafs for 5 seasons. Wow. And for two years, my role was within the high performance department. Okay. And I reported to the director of high performance. And I'm not a sports psychologist by my background. So the title that we came up with was personal and professional development coach. Wow. Kind of like a life coach, but more specifically towards the athletes and the staff. And then
I'm jealous already. Sorry to interrupt you.
It was good. And then
that's awesome.
And then there was a major transition within the organization, whether that be coaching and management, even players rising that were younger before. And within this new wave of change, I obtained a role called Director of Athlete Wellbeing and Performance. Okay. And within that role, it reported directly to upper management because it was a more holistic look at the development of the people within the organization. That could be the players themselves. Mm-hmm. That could be the team within the team. So looking at staff departments that looked at scouting and talent acquisition and everything in between. So that was 3 years. And then subsequent to that, the last year, what I've been doing is consulting with other organizations because I've realized of what's come to me is that many professional or elite sport organizations are trying to figure out this balance, this duality of like player care, athlete care, emotional well-being, caring for mental health, mm-hmm. within a high performance structure that's hyper competitive, transactional in terms of business relationships and a lot of money, a lot of stress, a lot of power. Mm-hmm. And yet where's the human-centered design mm-hmm. with regards to the organization? So I work with a professional soccer club in the UK. I work with the NBA Global Academies and Ineos Grenadiers. And all of them are in different realms of kind of like helping those clubs help themselves, figuring out what's best for them and supporting in that way. In addition to doing life coaching and other things and being a mom. So that's kind of what led us together. And I know this came about from a conversation at the rink. And it's really nice.
And we're real here. And we're happening. And this is awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm very appreciative of having Meagan here. And I think everybody else will be with regards to the podcast. And part of the Raising Men podcast is really mm-hmm. just helping parents, helping families and children navigate life, not just in sport, but mm-hmm. I think my experience is obviously raising 3 boys and trying to provide and learn my own challenges and be better. I want to raise 3 incredible young men, and this could apply to young women as well. So maybe if I could ask, in your experiences with all of these incredible things you've done, and obviously you're raising your young
Max,
man.
Max,
Max.
yeah. Little Max.
He's awesome.
He's a piece of work.
they all
Gives me
are.
some gray hair. Yeah,
They all
sure.
are. So what might you do maybe differently, or how might you suggest navigating or helping Max through his journey in life and in sport? Like what you've seen, and I know you've mentioned a bunch of things, but and maybe this is a big but what would you do with him or any other young athlete and helping guide them through? Are there some key pointers you've noticed, some things that really stand out?
I think so. My husband's name is Josh and our son's name is Max. We have a daughter that plays hockey, but for this conversation, I'll speak specifically because you are about raising men, and I think there is, at least in our family structure, there's a big difference. And so one of the things that I think is beneficial due to the family I was born into and observed as a sister. So my brother was an elite hockey player, did the whole Hockey Canada program of excellence, U17, World U18, World Juniors. He played in the Spengler Cup, got drafted to the NHL, played in the NHL, AHL, and had a long professional career. And I hope you have him on because I think he'd be a fantastic voice for this audience. Yeah. And so I had that experience in that environment as a sister. I was a competitive figure skater, but figure skating, I was done by the time I was 15, 16. And I observed our parents, both our dad, who was highly, highly involved in my brother's career. And definitely, I wouldn't call him a helicopter dad, but he definitely was of this generation where there was an intensity of commitment to my brother's development as an athlete, and also trying to think outside the box for competitive advantage, for creating whether it be skill development, the physical development of his body over time, or just looking for opportunities. So I observed that wave, and then I was in the professional environment. So circling back to your question, because sometimes I go on a tangent.
It's all good.
I think the thing that I'm going to try to hold true to is to not have fear that our son's going to fall behind. Even on the drive here, Josh and I were talking on the phone we have 1 week left of hockey, or 1 week left of summer, and our son's hockey program is starting. What do we want as a family? What's best for Max? What's best for us? And Josh is busy. He's away. He's about 20 hours away for work. So I have my work as well, and our daughter. So if I brought Max to the rink for 4 or 5 hours, what's Penelope going to do? Because I don't want her to always just feel like she's tagging along because her hockey hasn't started yet. Yeah. And so I think it distills down to fear that I think of missing out or making bad decisions or not knowing the outcome of the decisions. So trying to get everything in. And without judgment, I see that a lot in the youth sports environment that I've been in because last year I was pretty much at the rink every night being a mom, whether that be with our son or our daughter, and trying to navigate my own self and realizing that there's always going to be another tournament. There's always going to be another hockey practice. There's always going to be another program to register the kids for. Conversely, where are the opportunities for our kids if they love it and if they have talent? And as parents, how do we support those gifts? Yeah. And I don't necessarily know what the right answer is because I think it's always going to be a continuous cycle of change. However, I can tell within myself when I'm making decisions based upon fear or based upon like, this is an alignment and I know this is great for Max and I know this is great for us. And Josh is really great at, we always talk about these sorts of things, but it's a whole new world we're entering into in terms of like trying to figure out what's the best investment of our time and what's the investment of our money and where does family stay true to who we are trying to be, because we're still a young family. Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about in our last podcast with the gentleman from Power Tech is they basically said, and this might help you, but they had said that in their experience, there's no ideal answer to what you're trying to find. Yeah. And there's no there's no magic trick or something out there that exists that is the one answer.
Yeah.
So that, and I think one of the things that I've found for myself as I navigate through this as well is I want my boys in a positive, healthy environment that's surrounded by good families, good leadership from coaching, that demands the best of them, but also supports them.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely important. And I think you need to feel good. Like when you bring Max or anybody's children for that matter to something, that you feel good in being there and that they feel good and they're happy and they're positive. I think that's really the only right or wrong answer. That's the only way to sort of go about it, at least what I've seen so far.
Yeah. And to build on that, now I'm going to flip to the professional self. And one of the things I was excited to talk about in this, and it's a window into the professional landscape. And I'll speak specifically about hockey because that's the window that I was deeply immersed in for a long period, or relatively long period of time in pro sport, is the draft. And so it's like it matters and it doesn't matter, because it does. I think it does matter. It matters in the moment to a family as to what is the best decision to make. And in the playing the long game, those decisions, it's like, what is the outcome that you seek? And is that immediate decision helping at least point in the direction of the outcome that you're hoping for? And eventually the child will kind of co-decide, or drive for himself. And so, I mean, that all of these things that are created for youth, I think it's really important that we really pause and stop and think, is this helping our child? Is this helping the sport? And just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I know those are a whole bunch of cliches, but I think there's a lot of truth to that, because let's say that fear is driving a parent. Now I'm going to go to the professional self. So like the Dr. Popovic side, or Meagan, who worked in pro sport. And I used to do all these talks for parents, and this was even prior to having our own children. But I had this line, because they were on resiliency. Yeah. And I taught at Western, and it was an area that in London, Ontario, because I'm assuming this is global and you're going to have an audience. So it's about 2 hours west of Toronto. And a lot of the students that attend that university go straight down the highway from the greater Toronto area. And I would hearken to say that a lot of them come from affluent families that have the opportunity to provide all these opportunities for their kids. And when I would be teaching at Western, I'd be doing the resiliency workshops. I would often say to the parents, look, I'm not a parent. I don't know the day-to-day. I'm not even there yet at 3:00 in the morning, kind of trying to sort through not only the calendar, but what is best for this decision, and hopefully having a healthy marriage and those sorts of things. I'm not there yet. Yeah. But what I do know is I see your kids when they leave you, because I used to teach first-year students. Oh, wow. And I would teach hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them every year. And so there are definitely trends. And so that's how I tried to build out those workshops. And now I'm going to go to the NHL draft. So it's every year for professional hockey, there's an NHL combine and an NHL draft. And the combine is always held in Buffalo, and it's over the course of, say, Monday to Friday, and then Saturdays is what you typically see on TV. But the Monday to Friday combine is run by the NHL, and the top 100 players are flown in to Buffalo, and the teams who are all the teams in the NHL can provide a list to the NHL of who they would like to schedule meetings with, 20-minute meetings. That's after a year or two of the amateur scouts, who are, whether they be North American or European or Russian scouts, are providing their kind of evaluations of the players. And this is one of the last stages before the NHL draft comes, which is about a few weeks later. And so when I was with the team, the first year I was there, I kind of was empowered to look at the idea of character. Okay. And how are we going to utilize these 20 minutes with all these players? And at the time, I think we had 75 or 80. We decided to interview, or the team decided to interview tremendous number of players. Yeah. From first round pick to 7th round pick. And depending upon how the draft goes, you can't always predict who you're going to. So they wanted to do a whole catchment of players. And it was interesting to me from the lens of parent now, looking at this draft, of saying, if the goal for a parent is to help their child become a professional athlete, not one thing that they did as a kid was really taken into consideration for that draft. What was taken into consideration was the things that were done to build up that young person to get to that point of who he is in that 20 minutes of the interview. Now, things are observed in the year or two prior, but truly, what are the building blocks that were put into both his skill development and his character development that got him to a point where adults who don't love that kid and are looking to invest in a product are going to say, he's someone I want to invest in. I believe in him. I'm even going to take a chance on him. And what are those capacities and qualities? How I think that ties into raising young men is because I think a lot of times we think we need to get our kid in the right spot to help him have, this opportunity or this show. And I do think that matters to a certain degree. I also think that in observing player after player after player after player, sometimes the players that, what's the right word? What does my heart say? It was the players whose parents helped them develop a sense of self that I was so confident to say, this is someone we should invest in.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And the ones whose physicality is perfection, whose resume up until that point is the elite of the world, who says all the right things, but when you talk to that young man, and in some ways to no fault of his own, because he's really just trying his absolute best from every moment before he can even remember to be the best athlete, when there has been too much telling that person what to think, how to think, what to do, and when to do it, those are the investments that don't always turn out right. And I don't think any parent who spends 10, 15, 18 years of investment getting to that point of trying to fertilize that garden in that person, they don't want it to implode. They don't want his career to implode, but they also don't want to see the person that they love to not continue to thrive when he needs to stand on his own 2 feet. So
that's awesome. That's
powerful. I hope what just came out of my heart makes sense, because I hadn't prepared it in notes. I just think about that draft as a real precipice of the combine of those interviews and then the draft process. And it really is a precipice of change in a young athlete's life.
Yeah.
That is in many ways a deciding point to, is he going to have a professional career or take a different path with his sport? And when I think about the inner character development that gets to that point, I think it has us look at the decisions we make, perhaps with a more expansive lens.
No, I think that's powerful. I think looking at my children, and as you say that, there's a bunch of things that run through my mind. I think of my oldest, and he's been playing, and he's quite exceptional for his age at playing defense, but he wants to play forward. And as you say that, I'm like, I know even myself and others have kind of pushed him in this direction, but he wants something else at times, not all the time. And I think it's just, as you say that, I think to myself, maybe I need to be better in sort of fueling that desire. And not just in that, in other sports, in baseball, for example, he's an extremely good runner, but he wants to be a catcher. And I'm like, Henry, you'd be a great outfielder. You'd be a great, shortstop or something like that, because he's very athletic. And he's like, he wants to be a catcher, and as you're saying that in my mind, I'm thinking, I got to pull myself away from this and stop trying to make him perfect from my eyes and allow him to be him. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of the car ride home.
Yeah.
And what an opportunity of a bond where you're in a physical structure on a day-to-day basis with your child. And I think I think some of the players that I worked with, or even some of the professionals who did play, I hear a man his name's Scott Pellerin, and he has 3 children, and he was a pro. He won the whole Baker Award, and I think of Scott, and this is the cool thing of working in pro sport as a mom and working with these well, at the time it was all men, and really getting to pick their brains and say, like, I understand the sport from my lens, but like, help me understand it from yours. And one of the things Pelly always would say, and I know he does a lot of stuff in youth sport, even in girls and women's hockey in the US, he always advises parents to get in the car, say, like, great game, I love you. And then stop talking about hockey. So that the experience of that game or that practice stays with the athlete, and the role of parent and child stays parent and child, not parent / coach / mental performance consultant / therapist, and child / athlete / performer. And I wonder I've worked with some of the most awesome people who just, because they went through it and because now they coach, they see ways of going about doing it differently. And that was one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting, is like that car ride home, making that a time of presence for your kid to be with their dad.
I think that's huge. And I think, like, obviously I'm doing this podcast to help others, but in many ways it's like, it's bringing new life to myself. How can I be better? And all of this conversation, and I so much appreciate having you here. All of this conversation is just, in the back of my mind, it's like, answering some questions and maybe even lecturing myself in a way of saying, you need to be better in these areas. Because at times I catch myself as, coaching my child, and I'm trying hard with all my boys is to pull myself away and put them in environments where I can just hands off, trust them with coaching, that type of thing. So I think that's very powerful and incredible support for many people. And I think it kind of applies to everything. Like, how would I want to be spoken to after, whatever test or event, or, maybe somebody's going to critique the podcast, what I mean? Like, how do I want to be dealt with? And I think it's one of the things that we've talked about before, is you've said that a lot of parents, and I'm not going to take myself out of that picture, right? Like, a lot of parents, including myself, have these expectations of their children, but are they showing that expectation? Do they have the same expectations of themselves and leading by example with their children? Are they that example? They like, I know I'm particular with my children on picking up after themselves. Make your bed first time in the morning, get yourself together, don't be late, all these things. And I'm at times trying to create this perfect thing that doesn't exist. And, and I do love them and I do want the best for them, but am I holding myself to that same standard all the time? And I think you've mentioned that before, you've seen that. And so,
and I think that's part of the development of person, and I'm going through it myself as a parent, is like that continually pulling back to say, my kid's not my project, nor is his life totally my responsibility, or her life. And I think I thought of a couple things as you were speaking. One is something recent where I blasted I was so pissed. Oh my gosh. And it was in front of everyone. I don't give a shit a lot of time what people think about me, but I do care in the presence of others that my children are respectful and nice and not whining. And it went on and on and on for hours. And we were at this rugby match, this tournament that the kids were in.
Yeah.
And I just, as a parent, was watching this, and I thought, my dad was there, right? Yeah. So he's like, oh, my dad and I are like, well, we're the same, and we're like, well, clash all the time. And he's like, you're just so competitive. And I'm like, no, I don't give a shit if my kid plays rugby. Yeah. They were both on the same team, daughter and son is co-ed. I don't care. But I do care that they know that they chose to play, that mommy and daddy have to work to pay for them to have these awesome activities.
Yeah.
And that if they choose to go there, that there are certain expectations that we have of them. And it's not about scoring tries. This is just this weekend.
Yeah.
And it's about, are they putting effort in?
Yeah.
Are they looking other adults in the eyes and saying hi or responding to them? Are they listening to their coach? And if they're not doing those things, I don't know. And maybe one day is a bad day, but this has been like a lot. It's a good summer, but it's been a whole summer of trying to figure out this next stage of parenting because they're 6 and 8. And it's like, I have a responsibility as a parent to role model those things, because I definitely am not perfect all the time. And my kids have probably heard a lot too many curse words in our house coming out of my mouth, especially when I get into hockey talk.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have a responsibility to ensure that our kids know that those are behaviors that are expected. So when we're talking about expectations, it's like, I want them to know those are my expectations, and I'm not going to lower my expectations, because I think my kids deserve to be raised in an environment where, like, when they launch onto their own, they can see the difference. Because one of the things I said to them in the car, I'm like, you guys today were the types of kids that parents don't want their kids to be around, and that's not okay with me.
Yeah.
That's not okay with me. But in terms of performance, and I think it's going to be difficult to pull that back. It's like, I think it's like, what are the ingredients of performance versus the outcome to manage the expectations? Because those are transferable. And then conversely, like, looking at the home life of, like, how are we as a couple? How do we speak to each other? Am I going to bed at the right time? Am I trying to eat properly? Am I making the effort to have groceries? And even though our kids don't have groceries, it's like they're observing everything. They're observing me. And then kind of going back to the car ride, there was one other thing that came to mind. It's like, I think, you only have the parents have a window of time to have their kids be engaged with them. And then eventually their social life or their social development kind of transfers into the peer group rising, or they're great at sports and they begin to move away and they live at billet families and whatnot. So it's like that time is so precious.
Yeah.
It really, truly is. And then talking about role modeling, it was really cool, because when I was with the team, I worked with the Leafs, I worked with the Marlies, and I worked with the Growlers, and I worked with the prospects. So I had this range of players who I got to know by being around, and some wanted to speak with me one-on-one. Others I knew more in the professional way. But for the ones who knew me, everyone kind of knew I was a mom, and I was very proud of it. And it was cool. It was cool in an environment, because the one thing that I thought was neat and consistently observable with all the players, I would say a large majority of the players, is that they had tremendous respect for their parents. They had tremendous respect for their sacrifices their parents made to provide them with that opportunity. And they never felt guilt, at least the ones that I can recall in my mind in the conversations, but they just really felt fortunate to have parents who love them enough to bring them to all their different things and give them these opportunities to be great. And then the other thing that I was thinking about the athletes, that I think it's like, what did they observe in their parents? It was kind of interesting, because there were sometimes there were parents that were really, really involved in their child's development. Other times, even particularly some European players, Swedish players, Finnish players, Russian players, they moved away at a very young age. So the parental involvement in their development was minimal. Well, it was there, but it wasn't like here where they're shuttled around everywhere. And then others went to prep schools or played in the CHL or USHL, and they kind of moved away in high school and kind of had to launch into adulthood or independence earlier.
Yeah.
And when I think about those players, and when we're talking about raising men, there's two things that come to mind that I hadn't even thought about, but my heart says to say it now. One is, how do we help our young men learn self-love? And this is something I'm doing with a friend of mine named Brian McGrattan, and we were creating this workshop around this.
Yeah.
Because I picked his brain, and he's a big fighter, and we've known each other since we were kids. But our conversations always keep circling back around like, what is fundamentally important that young men have to thrive and succeed and also sustain the bullshit that exists in the highest echelons of professional sport, because it's cutthroat.
Yeah.
And for him, it's like, no, it's self-love. It's not this, it's self-love. And if that is absent in a man's life, right, it's particularly a young man's life, then other things begin to fill the void. So I wonder if maybe this is like another conversation we have. Maybe we'll chat about it at the rink and it's like podcast number 2. But I wonder if that's a really big piece of it. I don't have the keys to make that, to know how exactly to make that happen, but I think it has to always be on a parent's radar. Yeah. It's not confidence, it's self-love.
Yeah. I, even through my own personal journey is like, as a man, I would say in the last, like I've had women in my life ask me like, what's your love language? And, and I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, and I've had to in the last 5+ years sort of understand what that means and figure that out for myself. And then now it's like, okay. And I look for those things in my children because each of us have, you know, how can I show love to my child in a way that they understand it? And it's funny because my middle child, Ginger, Nolan, he's like absolutely a gifts person. Like the minute I give him something, he's like, Dad, I love you so much. You know, whereas Henry's very like touch. He needs a hug. He needs that affection, you know, and the youngest Connor is very much the same way, but understanding them differently. And I agree. Like, I love that you said that. I think that's a powerful thing. And we should definitely go into a podcast too and elaborate on it. You know, because I think I can add from my own perspective to that. But in saying that, I think that self-love and being able as a parent to help your child find that in themselves is very powerful. Yeah. So why don't we come back with a podcast number 2? I think we've left everybody with some incredible information today. I think it's been extremely powerful. And again, I love having Meagan here.
I have one more thing to say.
Absolutely.
I have to say it.
Do it.
Because it comes into a practical element for parents.
I love it.
And so I have this vision of when I used to I had an office in Toronto. It was in Maple Leaf Square, and it was in the studio condo, because I knew the players could come and they felt comfortable. They didn't feel like they were in like psychoanalysis. You know, it was just coming. It was in a place where they could go up and down the elevators and like they might just think they live there. So it was like trying to find the right space. So I had this little box condo and I had a little chair and a couch and a little kitchenette, and players would come. And sometimes it would be weekly, sometimes it would be every week, sometimes it would be like, hey, Meg, can you meet? And, you know, usually I would block an hour or 2 because I would know that young man needed some time.
Yeah.
And I think this is completely transferable to parents as well. The sessions where I tried to fix it, I know that they were like B- or lower. Yeah. I think in myself. Yeah. The sessions where a player would come and let's say he was like, I don't know, got 1 goal in the last 10 games and he's feeling pressure, or he's going to be a healthy scratch for the 7th game in the row, or he got sent down to the minors and he came back up, and he got sent down to the minors and came back up, or his contract renegotiation period is not going the way he wants it to go. So every game he feels like matters. And like their friends don't totally understand because they think they have the dream life. Their parents are their parents, even if their parents played pro. Yeah. They can't always help that situation. And yet they're walking around every day with this stress in their minds because their love is this game. Yeah. And I think that's so true for so many young boys who are stressed. Once they get to the point where their performance or their lack thereof in a season can really take over their day because they're so competitive and so in love with this game. And so I would encourage parents, and I have to work on it even when I have coaching clients still myself with players. And I remember it when I was with the team, is like just give that container of space to let your son let it out and almost like not talk. And then when it's done, let the son determine when it's done, almost like just draining it out, letting it go. And just know as a parent, there's going to be another conversation that could be had if that person wants. But sometimes having a young man be able to just let it out with no one else trying to tell him what to do is sometimes maybe the greatest gift I think a parent could give their son. And I saw it over and over and over again. And just the weight that would be lifted off these guys' shoulders when they'd like see like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. And sometimes like there were multiple times where I'd have a session like that and the player would go and he'd like light it up the next game or score a goal or multiple goals. And it really wasn't anything I did other than just hold that container and manage my own responses. Yes, probably sometimes if there were tears, I cried too, but really kind of not try to fix it because there's nothing broken. That young man just is trying to figure out how to pull everything out of the closet, sort it through in his mind and in his heart, and determine what he wants to put back. And I think that if parents, and we can all start doing it with our sons, I think the next generation of men will have more tools and more capacity to handle these emotions than maybe before. So that's what I wanted to say.
I honestly, there's been so much that's been powerful, and I appreciate you and I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate being here. Thank you very, very much. I think we'd definitely have to elaborate. Okay. Maybe get your brother involved in the next one.
Yeah, and I'll get Brian too. Maybe we'll get him to talk about self-love.
Big group discussion. Brian talking about self-love would be awesome.
It would be amazing.
It'd be awesome.
Yeah, we'll light it up. So,
all right. Well, thank you guys very, very much for tuning in again. Podcast number 5 here with Meagan Popovic.
Yep.
We're rocking it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best. You guys have a great day. Thank you.